Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAC Art Talks 2026. I'm Jing Han, the director of the Institute for Australian and Asian Arts and Culture, IAC, at Western Sydney University. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Barramundi people of the Darug Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land for thousands of years, and pay our respect to First Nations elders, past and present. Today, we are having a very special talk about contemporary Asian Australian performance. Several years ago, our advisory board member Annette Chouwa connected me with contemporary Asian Australian performance, known as CAAP, where she was the artistic director. IEC joined the collaboration with CAAP in running CAAP's Artist Lab. When the group came to one of the workshops on our campus, I was very surprised to see so many dedicated Asian Australian performance talents in one place. It was an absolutely invigorating and inspiring sight and scene. I felt so excited and also so moved because, as we know, artistic pursuit, especially in performance and theatre making, is a particularly hard path for Asian Australians. I have since followed Asian Australian performance on our stages very closely and have seen a great increase in the success of Asian Australian performances. So today we are delighted and privileged to have Tessa Leong to take us through the evolution of a cup. Just a brief introduction of Tessa. Tessa Leong is the artistic director of contemporary Asian Australian performance. Tessa has worked with many companies nationally and internationally as director, dramaturg, researcher, collaborator, across theatre, performance, dance theatre, live art, and socially engaged projects. She was the Griffin Theatre Company's inaugural Associate Artistic Director from 2020 to 2022, where she directed the world premieres of Merlin Tong's Golden Blood and Candle Fevers, Wherever She Wanders, to great critical and audience acclaim. Tessa is also a founding member of Adelaide-based theatre company Is This Yours?, for which she has directed Andrew Leake by Duncan Graham and David Williamson's The Club, an all-female three-actor version, as well as directed and devised #You Wanna Talk About It, Best We Forget, and Make Me Honest, Make Me Wedding Cake. As the artistic director of a CAAP since 2023, Tessa has directed highly acclaimed productions, which she will speak about in the talk. Now, please welcome Tessa Leong to give the talk, Making Changes on Our Stages.
Thank you so much, Jing. It is a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be part of this very prestigious group of people who have done IAC art talks. I have tuned into many, and we have been in discussion about me talking about CUP on one of these these talks for a very long time. So thank you so much for having us. Well, hello. I am Tessa Leong, and as Jing has said, I am the Artistic Director of Contemporary Asian Australian Performance. I'd like to acknowledge that I am zooming in today from the lands of the Gadigal. I'm here in Redfern at Carriage Works, and Redfern is known as not only a place of great significance to locals, but also the birthplace of Black theatre in this country. So I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, as well as acknowledge the former and current kind of theatre legends of this place before we start. So thank you so much for having us from here. I thought it only wise to start the conversation with exactly what Professor Jing was talking about. This is a shot from our Western Sydney Artists Lab, which we ran in 2021 in collaboration with the IAC at WSU, Griffin Theatre Company, and Belvoir Theatre Company, and Sydney Theatre Company. It was a really wonderful and intensive week that we had, and I will speak a little bit about it as it sort of brings together a few intersecting missions and methodologies that we hold dear here at CAAP. I come from a theatre directing background. So I trained in Adelaide as a theatre director at what was the Flinders Drama Centre as a 4-year theatre directing course. I formed Is This Yours, a company with friends from the course. And really, those independent values, I suppose, have informed my career and the ambitiousness that you need to have as an independent artist have continued to be a touch point for my career in the various roles that I've held. As Jing said, that my role previous to this was at Griffin Theatre Company alongside artistic director Declan Green, who is in this photo. And I also worked at Belvoir as the associate artist alongside Eamon Flack, who is also in this photo. And my predecessor at this role, Annette Shunwar, is also in the photo. So as you can see, it's a bit of a powerhouse of people and many, many connections. And I think that is something we'll keep returning to, that CAAP is always working on making connections and forging pathways between where people are now and where they want to get to, but also between people. I think quite often as artists and as practitioners, but also as humans and people who might have things in common or be able to learn things from each other. So contemporary Asian Australian performance is a place where we make new contemporary performance led by Asian Australian artists. We run initiatives like Artist Lab to build capacity and share skills and address barriers that have been present in the industry for Asian Australian artists for a long time. It has been an inherited mission that I have inherited here at CAAP, which has been about reaching main stages and major festivals. And while that is important to us, we also are really wanting to be alongside artists as they develop and find their own creative voices. It has been extremely important for us to ensure that those major companies and ones that were present at Artist Lab have been aware of and formed connections with these, as Jing was saying, very talented artists. So this was the Artist Lab. We had some really amazing notable guests as well. Jeff Kahn from Asiatopa was there. Justin Taplacido Shoulder, a really astonishing artist who's making a lot of international work now, was also one of the guest artists. And it was a wonderful week full of shared practice workshops and information that forged a lot of new collaborations and possibilities. So today I'll have a little chat to you about some of the things that we do at CAAP. This is a longhouse that we held, a panel discussion about cultural consultancy. This was one in 2023. It was obviously a very hot topic because it was very well attended. And look, we often talk about a longhouse as a place in which we can have conversations that we can't have elsewhere. Ones where there is majority Asian Australian artists or artists that are people of colour or that are somehow marginalised and feeling not accepted or celebrated in the wider industry. And from there, there is a really great solidarity and there is a great, I guess, place of being able to approach some of the difficulties that people are facing, that sometimes outside of these rooms, they feel like they are alone in facing. But when they are surrounded by other artists who have had their experiences and they hear there is a great knowledge then shared of what we could do next and questions to ask about the next step in the path. I will speak a bit about our mission. I'll speak a little bit about how CAAP came to be. We actually have the same origin story as Gallery 4A that some of you might know in Haymarket. And so we'll talk about a little bit on what our pathway as a company has been and some of the significant people along the way in that journey. I guess what CAAP currently does is that we are the only professional arts company that is dedicated to making exceptional contemporary Asian Australian work for all audiences. We always look to engender greater cultural diversity in the Australian performing arts by producing cross-art form theatrical works of the highest quality, and often in partnerships with major festivals, flagship companies, or community partners. We lead in developing and nurturing and championing Asian Australian artists to take their place on main stages, as I was saying, but also to find their creative voices. And as you would have noticed, we are a resident company at Carriageworks. I was saying I was zooming from here. And so we are really lucky to have some really fabulous other small to medium arts orgs in our midst. Some of our neighbours, along with Carriageworks and the Carriageworks staff, are Moogahlin Performing Arts, Awesome Black have just moved into the building, Performance Space, Performing Lines, and it's really wonderful to be surrounded by other companies who are also making great changes in the sector. So let me take you back a little way. So this is a really amazing scan that Rick Lau sent me a couple of years ago. It is from a short works night called 4 and 20, which I think must be a riff on the Pie brand, which I love. And of course, it was 4 20-minute works that happened on the same night. This one was in May of 2002. There was, as I was saying, our origin story really came about from 4A, which is the Asian Australian Artists Association. They came into being in 1996. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. So make sure you get along. They've got some wonderful exhibitions happening at the moment, as always, but Archetypes, which looks back over their 30-year history and to the future, is particularly exciting and on at the moment. And it took a few years, I think, for this collective of artists to realize that they had many art forms that they were all practitioners in across these years. And I think from what I understand, and I thank Annette Shunmore for sending me through an amazing timeline of the company only recently, which I really loved and have soaked up. That actually it probably had something to do with the funding availability as to why Theatre 4A broke away from Gallery 4A, because I think the gallery itself wanted to apply for funding for projects that were visual arts, and then people also wanted to put in under the same name works, cabaret works or short works nights for performance. And I think there was a discussion at the time to think, well, is there enough really to justify having a separate company? And so it was in March in 2002 that Rick Lau and Paul Cordero launched Theatre 4A. It was the performing arts division of Gallery 4A, which is now called 4A, the Centre for Contemporary Asian Art. And the gallery at that time was directed by Melissa Chu. Rick Lau is a pretty amazing person. He was one of the first graduates of NIDA's music theatre course. He is still a practicing artist who travels internationally with his works. And he teamed up with Paul Cordero, also a continuing dancer and choreographer, who was part of our Works in Progress last year, which was wonderful to have that full circle moment. And really, the two of them were motivated by a need for more opportunities for performers of Asian background to be seen on our stages. Um, Sounds slightly boring, but we became an incorporated association in 2004. And that really was the time where Annette Shunwo entered the scene as the chair of the managing committee. And that really began her very long relationship with this company. At the time, Rick Lau was the artistic director. So, Annette Shunwo, for those of you who don't know, is a revered broadcaster, actor, and producer. And she really became the force behind CAAP at that time. The artists, of course, and I think this has stayed consistent across time, but of course, they need time to dream up the work itself. And someone needs to power that work somehow by doing some of the administration and thinking about what grants can be applied for and doing the producing. So Annette certainly played an instrumental role, especially in those early days, to make sure that there were things happening to keep the works going. I think she managed to get people to think a little bit longer term than the project to project. And so that was instrumental in CAAP continuing, or at the time, Performance 4A. This is another collection of works that happened by Theatre 4A. And look, as a collective, Theatre 4A made a splash and really changed the main stages quite quickly, I would say. One of the first 4 and 20 nights was at the Sydney Opera House. There was another one that was at Belvoir Street. And so, really, there was an appetite by presenters and programmers to ensure that these works were programmed. And I think it was quite a shock to everyone that there were artists there ready to make those works. As part of this 4 and 20 structure, it came to be that they would offer then one of the works a development for a full-length show. And one of the first ones of those was Georgina Naidu's Yellow Feather, which is pictured in this slide. Rick went on to make many cabarets under the guise of Theatre 4A. How Now Rick Lau was one of them, and that was commissioned by the Sydney Opera House. And then here we have the Cooley performance that was on at Belvoir Street. And that one was also a collection of short works and actually has had many artists involved that are still within the CAAP vicinity, which kind of speaks to, I guess, a sort of loyalty or commitment in our wider artistic circles. In this era as well, Rick Lau's piece Men in Love toured to Shanghai, Singapore, and Hong Kong. But it was around 2008 that Rick moved back to Hong Kong and the company shifted slightly. So this is Annette Shunwo, who I've been speaking about, and another artist who was definitely in the early days of 4A and the gallery, and that is William Young. William Young had been making many performance works in the late 80s and early 90s. I believe the critic John McCallum said he managed to make a slide night interesting after he saw one of William's first works. And it was really based on his exceptional photographic talent and razor-sharp storytelling that he made these performance works that were quite new in form. These works were him delivering stories accompanied by photos and quite often also with a live musician. In 1992, he made a work called Sadness, which told the stories of the murder of his uncle Fan Yuan and the AIDS epidemic in Sydney. And he had astonishing photos that were very moving that went along with both of these intersecting storylines. It toured all over the world, and it was really the start of this new form and the voice of a very significant Australian artist that was coming to being. From there, he made dozens of new works that were monologue performances with photographs. And really, it was his work that influenced the work of 4A. And it was this form that started to bring together this really fruitful and very rich collaboration between Annette and William, who brought this form to other storytellers. So things get decided by the outside world, and in the late 2000s, the global financial crisis meant that William didn't have a lot of international touring options on his slate. And it was then that he proposed to Annette that he run a workshop for Asian Australian storytellers, or Asian Australian people, really, who would become storytellers in a work called Stories East and West. In 2010, it presented to a full house at Belvoir. And really, this success then led to many other works that William and Annette made together with new storytellers. Here we have images of Stories Then and Now, which played at Carriage Works, Casula Powerhouse, and Ausasia Festival. The storytellers, who are Ian Ang, Genevieve Chang, Michael Park, Sheila Pham, Paul Van Ryck, Willa Zheng, with music by Nicholas Ng, many of whom are still, again, in our vicinity and our CAAP family. There were multiple iterations of the work Life-Giving Stories, which talk directly to organ and tissue donation in relation to the multicultural New South Wales organ donation service. And I was really lucky to work on one of those performances with William in 2016. And that really was quite a special relationship, and then a special new relationship for me to this company. Another work of this style was Who Speaks for Me, that was presented at Riverside. So really we saw there were quite a lot of variations on a theme. This first person narrative borrowed from William's own method of showing photographs, and usually with a live musician. One of the variations of this was this very powerful work that William directed and was created with musicians Joel Marr and James Mangohig, and their work In Between Two. This was a kind of shortcut, I guess, because the live musician wasn't separate. These two musicians could make their own beats and their own raps and intertwine the stories and the music all together. It was a really wonderful experience, I think, for everyone. And I think, as far as I'm aware, James Mangohig still has the torture of trying to learn all of the lines that William said he must learn for the show. And they formed a very strong bond after that. This work also led to the Backstories, which was programmed at Adelaide Festival. Those solo works were with Razak Muhammad, Moya Dodd, and Chong Lu. So really amazing prominent Asian Australians who had really astonishing stories to tell. And it's interesting because then it feels like William's form sort of took on a life of its own. He inspired new shows that he wasn't even involved in anymore. And it's really his form that I see continuing on through the practice of many artists and many Asian Australian artists to this day. A couple of the other examples with different variations were with Sydney Festival and Griffin Theatre Company. CAAP made Serpent's Table, which presented here at Carriage Works. That meant you started to get snacks and food during the stories, which was very delectable. And really, I think that led to Double Delicious, which had 5 storytellers and 5 dishes of food for audiences who sat around big round tables for the performance. And this is Raghav Handa, the renowned dancer and choreographer in the work of Double Delicious, which played at Ausasia Festival, Sydney Festival, and went on a regional Australian tour, much to the delight of the storytellers who loved spending time with each other. Another person who is part of Double Delicious is the amazing chef turned performer and now actor as well, is Heather Jong. If you are lucky, you might be able to catch Heather in Griffin's Career Boo, Michelle Lim Davidson's work that was commissioned by Griffin Theatre Company, is currently playing at La Boîte and then going on to the Malt House in Melbourne. Um, she is a very charming and stern Korean auntie in the show. She's amazing. So really, it was in 2016 that CAAP moved into Carriageworks. We were invited as a resident company, and that's when we changed our name. I think Annette was ready for a new change and didn't require the 4A, which some people had lost the thread of. And so she named the company Contemporary Asian Australian Performance. And that's when we took up residence here. And over time, I guess there were works that bucked the trend of Williams' method. Yusukichi Murakami was one of them. You saw a picture of that earlier. And another one was a contemporary wayang kulit work called Prahu Prahu. This work made by the renowned visual artist Jumadi and the sound designer and composer Michael Toysuta. This work premiered at Sydney Festival and went on to AusAsia Festival. The work means boats in Indonesian, and this is a very explorative work with hardly any dialogue. And really, the premise is about trying to encapsulate what travels on boats. And Jumadi speaks very poetically about how it's not just people and animals and cargo that travel, but it's ideologies and religions and beliefs. And so this work, this very beautiful poetic work, had live musicians, live shadow makers, and an intergenerational cast of artists who took audiences on this sort of adventure into the mind of Jumadi's rich visuals, accompanied by this contemporary music that had been very much influenced by traditional Indonesian music and sound making. Jumadi and Michael are currently creating a new major work, so keep your eyes out around Sydney for it. So alongside all of the shows, Contemporary Asian Australian Performance really attempts to continue to build capacity and I guess has been instrumental at different eras across the sector in running artist development and pathway programs. I chose this picture of the Directors Initiative that was run. This particular photo is from Sydney Theatre Company, because the people involved and the outcomes of it were just so monumental. Some of the people in this picture are Arissa Ura, Gareth Ewan, Shari Indriani, Paige Rattray, Annette is there. The people who were involved, Kenneth Moraleda and Tasnim Hossain, Jennifer Rani and Courtney Stewart, after this program went on to secure roles at some of the biggest companies in the country. And I just think it really was the foresight of Annette and the really strong partnerships that were made during that program that really allowed people into the roles that they hadn't previously been in before. So Kenneth Moraleda became the resident director at Sydney Theatre Company, Tasnim Hossain, the resident director at Melbourne Theatre Company, and Courtney Stewart, the artistic director at La Boite. So it's a really wonderful program that I think it can't be overstated how special those weeks and those partnerships and connections can be and the impact that they have ongoing. Because of course, once those people are present in the companies, their networks are different and their understanding of the process and the practice and the ways in which to invite other people in expand what the company then can do. And it's very special. Another really effective initiative that was run before my time was Lotus. That was a playwriting program that was run with what's now called Australian Plays Transform, but was Playwriting Australia at the time. It was a 4-year program, and I think that also spoke to its ongoing effectiveness and impact. And that was run with Sydney Theatre Company, Melbourne Theatre Company, and La Boite. And Michelle Law and Merlin Tong wrote their first full-length plays as part of that program. So we're very honoured to have been part of these really special artists' journey. And of course, they were just as talented when they came to us, but we just got to be part of it. And it's very special for us to be part of their really amazing journeys. At the time of starting that Lotus initiative, I believe there were less than 10 published plays by Asian Australian playwrights. So there was a dire need actually for people to make a concerted effort to turn that around. And I think that we have seen that in spades. Of course, it's not always a straight line and it doesn't always go up exponentially, but really, I think the conversation has shifted significantly. We have here a photo of our CAAP in process. This is from this year. We had a really wonderful time in June. We have an annual event where we have works that are in progress by Asian Australian artists. We host it here at Carriage Works in Bay 20. And we really want the work and the excerpt of work. I think in some ways, looking at all this, it's reminded me of 4 and 20. So it's quite funny to look at it next to each other. But really, it's been a time for us to really engage a critical and yet supportive community environment for artists to show their work. We always want that critical feedback, but we want to do it over drinks and good food and in a good spirit to make sure that artists have the fuel to keep them going. We're also really fortunate to have some really amazing friends and peers and colleagues in the industry. And so we have a great industry turnout who tell me that's some of their favorite event of the year, who come along because they want to see these artists they haven't met before. And we've had a really great amount of works that have gone on to other places and connections and collaborations that have been born out of these nights. I'll take you now to the Bridal Lament. So this is the first work that I directed here at the company. It's working with the extremely talented and special artist Rainbow Chan, who I know is very well known to IAC, having exhibited as a visual artist. When I took over the artistic directorship at the end of 2022, I'd actually had a really great collaboration with Merlin Tong on Golden Blood at Griffin, of which Rainbow was the composer and sound designer for. And she sort of took me aside and said, "Oh, I'm working on this really big work called The Bridal Lament, and I'd love you to work on it." And it was from there that I managed to not have to say no to the artistic directorship or directing Rainbow's work. I managed to bring it all together, and CAAP became a new partner on the work with Performance Space and Ausasia Festival. So the work premiered in 2023. It was something that was years and years and years of research that Rainbow had done. And the work is a new pop song cycle based on a traditional bridal ritual that is no longer, the Weitao people, which is now kind of in the new territories of Hong Kong, would perform in anticipation of their wedding. And it's through Rainbow's matrilineal line that she has a connection to the Weitao women. And she had been to visit them to learn these laments. And it's these laments that instruct and form the structure of this work. The work was one that shocked us. There was so many years of development and research on Rainbow's behalf that we really had to make sure that this was a succinct work within itself and not trying to explain everything that she had researched over the past 8 years. We worked with some amazing artists and we premiered the work at Live Works and then it went to Ausasia Festival. Since then, it has also done a season at Arts House in Melbourne and then played Sydney Festival last year in 2025. And it's interesting, I guess, another one of the questions that we ask, this is Rainbow singing very, very well, very enthusiastically. Another one of the questions we ask at CAAP is how can we support artists so they make it to mid-career? What opportunities and support do they need to keep going and to deepen their practice and hone their craft? Having multiple seasons of the bridal lament has meant the work has become stronger. The presentations have resonated with more audiences, and we as a company have learnt more about how to access diaspora audiences and how to frame the work and talk about the work and invite people into it. The work has also seen Rainbow grow immeasurably as an artist, and that has been really wonderful to watch. She is multidisciplinary, a musician, a DJ, a painter. But the first time she did the bridal lament at Liveworks, she had never repeated a show. She'd played gigs and she'd sung so many things, but really this was the start of a new practice for her as a performance maker and performer. We are really thrilled that next year we'll be taking the work internationally for the first time to Komunitas Salihara in Jakarta. So if you're passing through, we'd love to have you. And look, this is a time, I guess, in the company where just to check back into the pragmatics, the company has gone from a project to an annually funded to now a company which has federal and state multi-year funding. So I guess that has allowed us as a company to think more deeply about artist pathways and what it is that we can do alongside artists to support them on their journey. This is one more of the bridal lament with Rainbow sitting in front of some stunning visuals created by the animator and digital creator Rel Pham. Rainbow is actually launching her album of the bridal lament on the 6th of September in Sydney. So if you are interested in the songs, please do come along. Another work that has come into the company while I've been here is the really charming and beautiful Story of Chi. Story of Chi was written by 3 writers, Hua Pham, Jeremy Nguyen, and Hiroki Kobayashi. It recently won an Australian Writers Guild Award for Theatre for Young Audiences, and it was directed by a very long-term favourite of CAAP, Kenneth Moraleda. It was the first time he'd directed a CAAP work, and it had a majority of cast from our Artist Lab programs, which was also very special. We're also talking about a remount tour of this work. The work was a really beautiful intergenerational story about a Vietnamese grandmother, a Japanese mother, and Chi, who is just lost her father. And the 3 generations of women are trying to navigate their grief, the loss, but also trying to find points of connection. And it's at this time that a young dragon, Mizu, appears. And Mizu, who is also an awkward tween, is trying to find their place in the world, and the two have a really beautiful connection. I'll just touch on Milestone. So to come full circle, it's been a real honour and privilege to work with William Young on a really monumental piece, Milestone, that really bridges his whole life's work and his whole life. It starts with a slide of him as a baby and finishes with his 80th birthday party. The work was co-commissioned by CAAP, Sydney Festival and Asiatopa, and we were so lucky to be able to take it to Seoul Performing Arts Festival last year. This work looks over a lifetime of photographs of William, his performances, the parties he's been to and the stories he's been privy to, and all of the subcultures that he's documented. This is a photograph from this premiere Sydney season in 2025, where it played with a 10-piece orchestra with celebrated composer and pianist Elena Katz-Chernin. This is William and I hosting an In Conversation at Asiatopa as part of their workshop series. And really, I think working on this with William, I realised that this looking back and looking forward is also very needed for CAAP as well. How is it that we understand where we've come from and what it is that we have to do next? We are facing some really big challenges in the arts sector at the moment. It might sound Boring to say, but there are still post-COVID worries about audiences. State governments are tightening budgets. There is less programming happening, and we are in an environment still where Asian Australian work is seen as a risk for box office, a risk culturally, a risk for connection to audiences. There's a bit less money going to new work development and less time to develop ambitious and works of scale. So I guess we've been talking about what can we do to make sure that we are playing into some of the things that we need to ensure artists are ready for opportunities if and when they return. So this is a really fun thing we're doing. We are hosting, because of the cost of living crisis and because artists so rarely can afford the very expensive tickets to shows, we have piloted a program called Ticket Club this year, and we have partnered with Sydney Festival and Belvoir. And how we talk about it is that Asian Australian artists get to come for free, but they have to bring someone who's not from the arts. So we're trying to convert people really to appreciate the live performance and to have really fabulous conversations afterwards. It's about the joy of discussing and getting together and having informal, but sometimes very critical and deep conversations about the work. Another thing that we are doing here at CAAP is supporting some amazing Asian Australian artists on their journeys, hopefully to mid-career. And that is our associate artist, Pratha Nagpal, and our playwright in residence, Jasper Lee Lindsay. We were very lucky to just come back from Yogyakarta, where they hosted the Asian Playwrights meeting. And we had a really wonderful time connecting with playwrights and artists from across the region, hearing 2 play readings a night and being part of the forum of conversations and panels every day. What we're feeling at the moment is that there's a bit of a gap in the middle. There are some really astonishing artists who are, I guess, at the moment still seen as exceptional. And there are some in mid-career, but not many. And then there are a lot of emerging artists. So we're thinking about how we can ensure that some of these emerging artists make it to mid-career and get the experience and the guidance and the support that they need. I think, this is just a little photo of us in Yogyakarta, having a lovely time. And look, I think the main thing is that we keep repeating these artists' names. We keep supporting them. We think times have certainly changed from the early 2000s when it comes to representation. But artists seem to have new challenges now about consistent of engagement, about getting stuck in emerging, a lack of cultural competency and the difficulty of making a living in the city. So I think we keep needing to go on that journey with Asian Australian artists to make the work that they want to make and in the way that they want to make it. So thank you so much for having me, Jing. I have a little video, but do we have time to play it?
Yeah, please. Wow. We just are so fortunate to have you. I enjoyed it so much, and I'm sure this recording will be enjoyed by many. Again, Tessa must write a history book of CAAP.
Yes.
So it's so wonderful. And look forward to working with CAAP and with you more on this great platform, So it's just such a inspiring for younger generation that the world is open to them. It's not they're not just locked in one way. And, yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jing, for having me. It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you,
Thank you.
audience. See you next time.